everybody, and welcome to Coming and Going, a podcast that is designed to be a biblical guide for your parenting journey. My name is Joe Crabb, and I have the privilege and honor of being the host of this podcast and to facilitate conversations with an array of individuals whose heart is aligned with mine and most likely with yours as well. And that is to see the gifts that we have been blessed with our kids, to see them grow as young men and young women after God's own heart, to be well equipped and encouraged, at times challenged and corrected, as we look to, again, be good stewards of the gifts that God has given us. And of course, always looking back to the truth of his word to help direct our ways as we look to help our kids follow God's will for their life. And so we do this all, as the name of the podcast says, as we are coming and going, which is derived right out of Deuteronomy chapter 6, that as they were coming and going, that the Israelites throughout the generations were to remind their children of God's faithfulness. And so let us be found faithful in doing the same. And I hope that today's episode is an encouragement to you as we share of the grace that we've received, the mistakes that we have made, as we have looked to, again, glorify God through parenting. And you are finding us in the midst of a series that we have been doing as we've been highlighting what it looks like to parent through these particular phases of life. We're looking at parenting through elementary, preschool, and we have been in this beautiful subset of life with middle school and high school students. So I am very grateful today to welcome an amazing guest to the podcast, Dr. Kara Powell. Dr. Kara Powell is the Chief of Leadership Formation and Executive Director of the Fuller Youth Institute at Fuller Theological Seminary. Named by Christianity Today as one of 50 women to watch, Kara is an author and serves as youth and family strategist and speaks regularly at parenting and leadership conferences. So with that, Kara, thank you so much for joining the podcast. How are you doing today?
Oh, my pleasure, Joy. It's great to be with you. I am doing pretty well. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Kara, I've been so encouraged and edified in so many ways as a pastor and as a parent by the work that you have done with Fuller Youth Institute, the books that you've been so kind to read. I was just telling you right before the show, for those who are listening in this phase of life, I know we'll get to some of the content here, but a conversation I had with a lady yesterday at church who was sharing with the difficulty of parenting adult children. And although I don't have adult children, I often interact with those that are in that phase. And so your book, Growing With, has been such an encouragement in so many ways. And so thank you. Just thank you for your faithfulness to the Lord and for allowing us to be a part of your family, as I'm sure many times you are writing from your own experience, both within the Youth Institute and within your home as well. So yeah. Will you just share with us a little bit about your family?
Yeah, thank you, Joe, and thank you for those very kind words. As you were reading my bio, I was thinking that while my jobs at Fuller Seminary are decently complicated, they are a piece of chocolate cake compared to parenting. And don't get me wrong, I love parenting. I love parenting with my husband. I love parenting our 3 kids. But nothing keeps me praying for wisdom, seeking mentors, scouring research more than parenting. And so Dave and I, we have 3 kids. So Nathan is 23, Krista is 21, and Jessica is 17 and in 12th grade. So we are approaching that empty nest chapter. Although I'll say once our kids started driving, we already saw a big leap in their independence.
Yeah,
so
you get a glimpse of it.
Yeah. I feel like we've had, a bit of empty nest, but we'll get to experience all that when Jessica goes to college, presumably this coming fall. So
that's wonderful. I'm always just so grateful when we have individuals on the podcast, obviously, who are also parents, and to hear about the particular phases that they are in, that you have been pretty much over these last 5 or 6 years in this phase of seeing your kids move out from the house, and like you just said, what this means for you and your husband as well.
Totally.
as parents and as a married couple. And
Yeah.
so thank you so much for sharing. And I'm sure we're going to get a little bit of that insight about what it's been like to parent high schoolers. Now you're
Yeah.
at the end of 3 of 3. So for
Yeah.
sure, an expert. But I think what you said there too is I think we could all probably relate
Yeah.
to as parents. It's like it's such a gift, but you're right. As difficult and complicated as some of the jobs are that we might have and hold and other
Yeah.
responsibilities,
Yeah.
nothing compares to the daunting task and then the beautiful reward
The
of being a
joy.
parent. So.
Totally. Totally. Absolutely.
And we're talking about a phase of life that, myself, I have 2 girls, one's 6 and one is just about 9 months now.
Oh,
And every parent, obviously stops me and says it goes by fast and
hold
it gets harder.
hold
That the
on.
problems just you have difficulties now, but the problems get bigger or different or more nuanced and complicated, especially in this phase that we're looking at with parenting high schoolers. And according to research from the Fuller Youth Institute, we know that today's high schoolers represent the most anxious, diverse, and adaptive generation in history. So really, what we want to talk about is how can we as parents maximize this season of life with our kids and continue to foster their relationships with Jesus and, of course, with us as well. And so I've been starting each one of these parenting phase episodes and asking our guests the same question about their phase. And so with that in mind, Kara, let me ask you this question. What do you love most about 9th through 12th graders, about high school students?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, can I have 2 answers, Joe? Will you give me that instead of just one? Would
You
that
can
be
have
all
as
right?
many as you
Okay.
like. Please do.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. Well, a long list comes to mind. I really do love being around adolescents, parenting adolescents. High school went by super quickly for me and my husband with our kids. I think partly because we did enjoy the vast majority of it.
Yeah.
And I would say the 2 things that come to mind first for what I love about young people is their potential and hunger to make a difference in our world.
Amen.
Young people, they're understanding their gifts as they're in high school and their passions become more clear. So whether it's volunteering at the local public library or trying to raise funds to help end sex trafficking globally, just to see our young people really be used by God, be changed by Christ to
Amen.
change our world. So
Amen.
that's certainly what one of my favorite things about young people. I think the other thing I love about teenagers and high school students specifically is they ask such great questions.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
love high school students' questions. They're so real and authentic. They're transitioning from concrete thinking to more abstract thinking. So they can
Yes.
ask more of those what if, what about, how might we sort of questions. So I see teenagers and high school students specifically as great change agents and great question
Amen.
askers.
Agreed. They have a way of humbling you and encouraging you.
Yeah.
And if you don't see it as a gift, you can easily become frustrated or shut them down
Yeah.
when they're trying so eagerly to make a change or wanting to ask those questions. But when you see, perhaps even similar to maybe many of us when we had kids who were brand new, just born, and that sense of discovery that
Yeah.
they have as my 9-month-old is now starting to crawl. And so she
Oh,
loves just discovering everything
yeah.
that is around her all the time. And she'll just stop
Yeah.
and look up and give a big toothy smile. But there's that same kind of joy at times and that same sense of wonder with high school students, but in such
Yeah.
a vast way. And oftentimes I've seen it myself or I've seen it in others where if you don't approach it as such, an opportunity to teach them, that you can become cynical or end
Yeah.
up shutting them down.
Yeah.
But it's a beautiful and sometimes tough terrain to explore. But as we're looking to help them, explore this and lead them and come alongside them, even at times learn from them, what are some of those things that high school students are going through, developing and processing through now? What are some of those trends that you're seeing that may be very different from their parents when they were in high school, whether the parents were millennials or
Mhm.
Gen X, or some maybe even boomers. So what
Flip
are some of
phone.
those differences that you're seeing from today's generations of high school students?
Yeah, yeah. Well, you actually very quickly named what our research-based answer is. So I'll go back to that. We spent
What?
some time a few years ago trying to understand what does make this generation unique. And we landed on three
Mhm.
words. The first is anxious. This is an anxious generation. If you look at mental health
Mhm.
challenges across the board for all generations in the US, we're seeing record highs and young people specifically. So this is a anxious and stressed generation. I don't
Yeah.
know a family with teenage girls that's not dealing with mental health challenges. I don't know one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Research tells me they exist, but I don't know one. And let me just say,
Yeah.
adolescent boys are a half step behind.
Mm.
So this is an anxious generation. This is, and we don't totally know why that this generation is anxious, but we do know that their anxiety certainly increased as cell phones became more ubiquitous. So this
Yes.
is a technology savvy, tech native world versus some of us who are more tech immigrants learning along the
Yeah.
way. For our kids and our high school students, technology is just a given. Which I love technology, and
Is
it
it?
almost certainly is contributing to that anxiety. So this generation is anxious. This generation is adaptive. This generation of high school students, they are creative, they are innovative, they are
Yeah.
entrepreneurial, they are visionary. And so we love that about this generation of high school students. And then this generation is diverse. This is the most ethnically and culturally diverse generation of teenagers that our country has seen. In 2020, in the midst of everything else that happened in our country, we crossed a line that now half of those under 18 are young people of color, and half of those are young people who are white.
Shit.
So this is a diverse generation. So I would say they're anxious, adaptive, diverse. When I look at what's happening in our culture,
Yeah.
let me add another word to the mix, and that this is a divisive era.
Yes.
Arguably since the 2016 election, regardless of how you feel about the election, our
Yeah.
our country's become more and more polar,
Yep.
and I think less kind.
Yeah.
And sadly, that's true in the church and a Christ following adults also. So, according to Springside Research Institute, today's 13 to 25-year-olds are 3 times as likely to have been hurt by organized religion as to trust organized religion. Let me just say
Hmm.
that again. They're 3 times as
Yes,
likely
please
to
do.
be hurt by organized religion as trust organized religion. So
Yeah.
this generation, they don't trust institutions. They
Yeah.
don't trust adults they don't know well. And sadly, we as adults and we in the church, we've earned that lack of trust. So I think part of
Hey.
what we need to do with our young people is rebuild trust with them.
Yes. Yeah. Listening to the answers as you're sharing them, I'm seeing this thread that can occur when we can end up being dismissive towards some of these very real
Yep.
contexts and
Yep.
realities that these students are dealing with,
Yep.
because we don't see them that way. I remember in the height of everything from 2016 to even 2022, that reality of like, oh, we don't understand sometimes the ramifications of the world and how it has such an effect on such this formidable age, and thinking
Mhm.
through, you know, different than when you and I grow up in many ways, where if our parents had a disagreement, if your and I's parents had a disagreement, we would probably never know about it. But if today's teenagers, their parents had a
Yeah.
disagreement, oftentimes it's playing out even at times on social media. I'm going on the school district's Facebook page and seeing them go back and forth, and now they're saying very visceral and mean things to each other.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you and I are sitting in math class with each other
Yeah.
the next day. But sometimes a parent can feel be dismissive, be deflecting of their own responsibility with that, or not really getting to really the heart of the next question and what you share about in your most recent book, which is 3 big questions that change every teenager. We're going to include a link to that book in the copy
Great.
of the show, and I encourage you parents to check it out. But in that book, you talk about the importance of practicing good listening skills and empathy in conversations with teens and kids. So with what you just shared about what they're going through, why is this practicing good listening skills and empathy so important when parenting this age group?
Yeah. Well, we talked about earlier that one of the things we love about high school students is how they ask questions. I think often we as adults, we're missing their biggest questions. The 3 big questions that change every teenager research was actually catalyzed in part by a 15-year-old who said, "I'm tired of the church answering questions I'm not asking."
Wow.
Wow is right. Yeah, Joe.
Wow.
I'm tired of the church. I'm tired of the church, or let's say my family, my home, my parents, my step-parents, my grandparents, my caregivers. I'm tired of the church and these adults answering questions I'm not asking.
Yeah.
And so we thought we've got to understand young people's biggest questions better. And so we actually studied, what is it that young people are asking underneath their questions about what am I going to do on Friday night? What college am I going to go to? What hours am I going to get at my after school job, et cetera? What are they really wondering? And that's where we landed on 3. And that is, these 3 are identity, which is who am I? Belonging, which is where do I fit? And purpose, what difference can I make? So
That's
identity, belonging, and purpose. Now, these are questions that all of us wrestle with. I would say these are human questions, not just teenager questions. But for those of us over 30, these questions are more at a low simmer. For high school students, these questions are at a rolling boil. And let me just say that if one of my kids is ever doing something that feels a little off, a little askew, like, wow, I'm surprised they're doing that. When I take a step back and ask, okay, are they looking for identity? Are they looking for belonging? Are they looking for purpose? Like all of a sudden the penny drops. And I have so much more empathy to understand, oh, that's why that's so important to them. That's why they're reacting to me this way. That's why whether or not they made captain of the volleyball team means so much. Because they're looking for identity, belonging, and purpose. So whenever there's emotional heat, whether it's in me or in people around me, I try to ask, okay, what are they looking for? Identity, belonging, and purpose. And it helps me understand more and have better conversations with them.
That's good. I think too that helps address, I'm sure, those phases that those things that they're dealing with currently. With they're anxious. They're part of an adaptive culture.
Yeah.
Because even both, that's a positive. Like that can be seen as a positive or negative. The anxiousness might be coming from a good concern, or it could be coming from something unfounded. But still, to say, I don't want to be dismissive of it. Let me practice these good listening skills, see through that framework of those big questions with a heart of wanting to gain empathy so I can help not be dismissive to their concern, which again, could be easy for us to do. If I'm post 30, I'm like, listen, it's not that big of a deal. The world's always been bad, or this doesn't matter now. It won't matter in 10 years. So don't get upset about it. But to say, hey, they're clearly wrestling through something. How am I then being empathetic through this? Or like you said, not even like sometimes their kid might create something and the avenues that they have to create, the canvases are far more varied than what we grew up with. And so to say, well, why does that incite a passion within them? Listening and gaining empathy so that you can cheer and champion them on all the more. So I love those questions. And I love how they're such big buckets that you are able to really see these different facets of the lives of a student in this age going through. Now, I know that one of the things that can be tough for parents in these phases is wanting to, prepare them for adulthood, but at the same time wrestling with that tension of protecting them, maybe wanting to fix their problems.
Yeah.
But we know we often can't. We can't fix the struggle that they're going through. So what encouragement do you have, principally practically, for parents who may be navigating a tough season with their high school students, whether
Yeah.
they find themselves being distant from God, they're dealing with difficulties with interpersonal relationships, or thinking about their future and what's next
Yeah.
after this phase?
Yeah. Well, it's a very timely question. One of our kids has been going through a tough situation. I'll try to share without revealing the gender if I look back to that. So
Yeah.
it's just because I haven't asked permission to share. So
Yeah.
so it's something that my husband and I are navigating like every day. And for a couple of weeks, it felt like we were navigating every hour with this child.
Yeah.
And I'll start by saying one of my friends and colleagues, Scott Cormode, has a great perspective on parenting. He says, as a parent, I want to protect my kids from pain on the one hand, but on the other hand, I want them to have the kind of growth that only comes from pain.
Oh,
And
yeah.
oh my gosh, that's so true. Like, I want to be a goalie at
Yeah.
the soccer net of my kids' lives, keeping pain out of
Yeah.
that net. And yet, I was just listening to a podcast recently that pointed out that most of our transformation happens through suffering.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
just hate that, Joe. I mean, my least
Me
favorite,
too.
my least
I'm
favorite
getting sad.
verses. I know, totally. My least favorite verse in scripture, and a little heretical for a theology faculty member at a
Yeah.
seminary to even say that. But my least favorite verse in scripture is Romans 5:3-4,
Yeah.
where Paul writes that suffering leads to perseverance, character, and character, hope.
Yeah.
And I want my kids to have perseverance, character, and hope without the suffering.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
it's really
Dang.
tough. So, let me just share with what our kid has been going through. That's
Yeah.
been disappointing. Nothing that she did. Oh, there, I just revealed the gender. It was one of
Oh,
our
we can
daughters.
edit it. We can edit it.
It's okay. Nothing that she did, but decisions that were made that affected her.
Gotcha.
And there's been tears. And, I know my tendency is to rush in too quickly with the bright side, with the, God's in control, God's going to use this, etc.
Yeah.
And one time I did that in talking with her, and she kind of pushed back, and she was right, because I rushed too quickly to trying to point out, where God is in this. And I just needed to sit with her in the pain more. And so my husband and I had done a lot of that, like sitting in the pain with her, asking her, is there any way that we can support you better? And as she's ready, pointing out that God is good, God is sovereign, God's going to use this. And even, recently I just affirmed her for saying, I told her, like, I'm so proud of you for how you've been honest about how hard this is. And you've had grit and perspective and trust in God in the midst of
That's
it.
good.
And I think, the healthiest people I know are both. Like, they're both authentic about how brutal sometimes life can be, and say, there's a God that I trust in who is good and loving, and God is my refuge. So,
Amen.
Getting even more tangible, you and I were talking before we started recording about something wise that Lisa D'Amour says. She's a therapist who's a lot of her work is focused on teenage girls, but her work is just as relevant for teenage boys. And she has this great phrase that I would encourage parents and step parents and caregivers to keep in their pocket. And it's basically to empathize and empower. So her phrase is, wow, that really stinks, and I think you can handle it. And there's all sorts of derivatives of that. Like, wow, I would be stressed if I was you. What do you think are your options? Boy, I'd feel lonely if my friends acted that way toward me at lunch also. How can I help you? So
That's good.
This balance of empathizing and empowering. And in the case of my daughter recently,
That's so good.
Like, I moved too quickly to empowering. I needed to spend more time with her, like, in the pit.
Yeah.
And, eventually she was ready to hear that Jesus was with her in the pit, but she just
Yeah.
needed a bit of time to feel what it was like to be in the pit. And she needed to know that Dave and I were with her in the pit. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
That's
I
so
would say
good.
that phrase of that stinks and you can handle
Empathize.
it are all sorts of derivatives that are empathizing and empowering. I think that's one of the best gifts we can give our kids.
It's so good. It's so good. When you were sharing that, this odd visual came to my mind of these clips I've seen before. I think there's a famous one from the Olympics where a runner is running. He blows out his quad or
Oh, yeah.
ACL or whatever, and his dad jumps over the
Yeah,
fence and
exactly.
runs to his son and bears with him arm in arm across the finish line. And
Totally.
it's a beautiful picture right there. That's empathy. And I'm
Yeah.
sure that he's been with him to empower him, since then, and with the healing process. But in that moment, he needs somebody to empathize. He needs someone to pick
Yeah.
him up and being reminded of the truth of Scripture there. That difficult passage and yet a redemptive one in Romans
Yeah,
5. You're right,
absolutely.
like it produces perseverance. It then gives way to character. In which, like, yeah, of course, I want my kid to be a good kid. I don't want my kid to be the mean kid or a jerk or anything like that. It's like,
Yeah, right,
yeah,
right, right.
what it is that they need that suffering that will
Yeah.
ultimately refine them. And as I'm sure you and I have gone through before, we see God's redemption through that
Yeah.
suffering. We
Yeah.
see His goodness and His
Yeah.
grace all the more, which I think that at the end of the day, that is what I would want my daughters to rest in, is His goodness and
Totally.
grace,
Totally.
even in the midst of difficult circumstances. And so
Yep. Yep.
that is so good. I want to say that again. So for parents to be, I think, quick to empathize and empower,
Yeah.
to listen, as opposed to trying to be quick to fix,
Yeah.
or to be quick to dismiss because
Yeah.
of maybe how we're personally feeling about it, because we
Totally.
don't know how to fix it, or we're just frustrated with it because our kid has been going through it for however long. We're just like, can you just get over it? Like, there's
Right,
other things
right,
that are going on right now,
right.
or whatever.
Yeah.
When we're never going to be ashamed of ourselves, or feel like we've done something wrong. I think if we stop and do that, empathize and empower.
Yeah.
That's such a good word. And I know that we know as we do this that it's a beautiful gift that we have in having others to come alongside us, to bear with us, to spur us on to love and good works. Essentially, what we even hope to do with this podcast is to remind those parents as they're listening, as they hear again of the mistakes we've made, the grace that's been given, and what God has taught us as we've been able to minister to both our own families and others in different contexts, that there's a beautiful partnership that the church gets to have with families, especially in the lives of high school students. And so in your experience, both personally, professionally, why is it so important for parents to partner with their church as they raise their kids this age and beyond?
Yeah. Great question. So in our sticky faith research, which was some research we conducted over a decade ago, we looked at 500 youth group graduates during their first 3 years in college to see what was correlated with mature faith. And one of the things we looked at in high school was youth group participation variables. We looked at 13 youth group participation variables. And you'll be glad to know that being involved in service was correlated with mature faith in high school and college.
Yes.
Studying scripture was correlated with mature faith in high school and college. But of everything that we looked at, what was most correlated with mature faith in high school and college was intergenerational relationships, bringing the generations together. And so one of the very tangible ways that my friend Chuck Clark has said that is we need a new 5-to-1 ratio. And what does he mean by that? Most churches, if you show up on a Sunday morning or listen to them plan an upcoming event, they'll talk about, well, we want one adult for every 5 kids. And what we're saying out of our research is, what if we reverse that and have 5 adults around every high school student? And we don't mean 5 small group leaders. We don't mean 5 Bible study leaders. We mean 5 adults who are on your kid's team, who know your kid, who are praying for your kid, who are supporting your kid. And so, as part of what we get to do as parents is help create that safety net of adults for our kids. And the church, there's no better place than the church to create that safety
Amen.
net. And so
Amen.
as your kid, whether your kid is 6 or 16, as they seem to connect with, say, another adult at your church, they smile at them on the weekend worship services, or they give them a hug, or seem to make a
Yeah.
beeline for them, whatever it might be. Well, pay attention to that. And maybe that's an adult or I'll say an adult. It could be a 23-year-old, but maybe that's an adult
Yeah.
who you want to invite over for lunch after church, or invite to your kids'
Yeah.
basketball game, or when your kids are little and you need babysitters, maybe those become your babysitters, so that you're just constantly surrounding your kid with other adults. Our
That's
daughter who's getting ready, she'll be 18 next month. And so all our kids play volleyball. They're tall and athletic, and they're not aggressive. They don't like touching the other team. So volleyball's perfect because you get in trouble
Yeah,
if
there
you
you go.
touch the other team. So with all three of our kids, and just our third, when they turn 18, we've gotten a volleyball, and we've had all the adults that are significant in their life sign that volleyball.
That's wonderful.
And that's for us, like, you're 18, here are the adults who are on your team that you can continue to turn to for wisdom, for support, for prayer. So, I would say not only as parents and step parents do we try to facilitate those relationships, we want to remind our kids of those relationships too.
That's so good. And the thing it leaves with the questions for parents, and then thinking, okay, who are the adults that you are intentionally inviting into the life of your family, and the life of your child, to be an additional example? So if you're, maybe it's needing to be a part of a small group within your church, or just as you're serving, I know that there's always great opportunities if you are going on a mission trip with your kid, or finding a place regularly to serve within the church. Naturally, by proxy, you're going to be engaging with other believers. And so for those parents that are listening to ask themselves those questions, who are the other followers of Jesus Christ that we are intentionally inviting into the life of our family? And it made me think, I have someone in my life who shared it before, of a student cannot have enough adults who love Jesus in their life. Like they could, when they're like, oh yeah, we have certain ratios for small groups or parents who want to serve in this way. We don't have a spot. It's like, nah, we need to fill this place with people who love Jesus, who love students. And obviously they go through all of our other trainings and so on and so forth. We still have our processes, but the sentiment, the heart of, we want, to put adults in the lives of these students, to model Christ to them. Such a gift God has given us in the church and in a Christ-centered community for us to really leverage, and to also be a part of. Like you said, you guys are getting ready to enter into the next phase of parenting, as becoming empty nesters, and seeing what opportunities God will give you guys to continue to minister as those who have closed out these phases of these first 18 years with all three kids. Kara, this has been such an encouragement. I have a deep love for students. I've been a part of student ministries for countless years, and although my kiddos are far off from this phase of life, my heart often is very near and empathetic towards the high school student, the middle school student, and really to the parent, of helping to clear up these disconnects that can so easily happen. But knowing at the heart of so many parents is to want to see their kid, their student, drawn closer to the heart of Christ. So thank you for sharing practical and principle wisdom that really helps serve as a way for parents to do just that. So as we close, I would love just to give you opportunity. Any final words of encouragement for parents as they look to maximize this season or phase in their kids' lives, to continue to help them discover their place in God's unfolding story?
Yeah. So I'll share one of the biggest mistakes I make regularly is I expect my kids to be younger versions of me. And they're not. They have a different faith than I do. They have different passions than I do. And so, I would say I do my best parenting when I'm not trying to force my preferences onto them, but when
Yeah.
I'm helping them be who God's created them to be. So, like, really practically, one of a question I like to ask my kids regularly is, when do you feel closest to God?
Eh,
And for one of our kids, it's during worship. And so,
yeah.
that child's been involved in worship leadership, and before that child could drive, we were driving that kid to worship practice on Thursday nights when I didn't want to, but I knew worship was
Yeah.
important to that child. And so for that child, it was worship. For another one of our children, it's being with other Christians. And so,
Yeah.
how do I make sure that that child is surrounded by other Christians and regularly in fellowship? For our daughter, who was struggling recently, when she feels closest to God is in nature. And so, in
Eh,
the midst of her dealing with real sadness, I encouraged her, babe, I think you should go to a park or a canyon or the beach or
yeah.
something and just get some time with God and nature. And she did. And it didn't make her feel all better, but it was part of God's healing and transformation for her.
Yeah.
So, whether it's knowing when your kid feels closest to God and making sure they get that time, whether it's understanding what they're passionate about, and making sure that your family is involved in that, whether that's ministering to those who are homeless or climate care, whatever it might be. Lean into what matters most with your kids, and even if that means that your preferences stay in the back seat, that's just
Yeah.
fine for now. Let their
Yeah.
preferences and who they are be in the front seat.
Yeah. And what you just shared there too, those preferences are of every example you just listed. They're great things. They're a
Yeah,
reflection of the way that God
yeah,
has created them and wired them,
totally.
and it truly lets you do what you discussed earlier, and that is gain empathy.
Yeah.
And as you do so, that relationship gets all the richer,
Uh-huh.
and knowing that it will just continue to build, because we've had them in this particular phase, but we know that they're going to be going into another one,
Yeah.
and that relationship and being able to have that foundation and being that trusted person as they enter into the next phase of college and career and potentially marriage and children and on down the line will bring its far greater complexities.
Totally.
But to be able to instill empathy in ourselves and help them see where they are drawn closer to the Lord, whether through worship, through community, through nature. That's such a good gift. That is such
Uh-huh.
a good insight. So, Kara, again, thank you so much. This
Well,
has
my
been
pleasure. It's been a
such a
great
joy.
conversation, Joe. Thank you so much.
Yes, of course, of course. And listeners, thank you for tuning in. We hope that this has been an encouragement to you, whether you have been reminded of truths that you have already heard, or picked up something new along the way. We hope that ultimately it's been an encouragement and edifying to you as you look to disciple and lead your students well. And if it's been an encouragement to you, or you know someone that it would be an encouragement to, please share it with them, pass it along to them. And if there's any way that we can best minister to you and your family in the season of life that you're going to, please reach out directly. We are here to be of any help. And one of the ways that we help is, by having great episodes like this, as well as connecting you with some amazing resources. And so we've talked about 3 awesome resources already in this episode: Sticky Faith, Growing With, and of course the book 3 Big Questions That Change Every Teenager. We'll provide links to those books directly in the copy of the show. And I had received word that we're going to look to give away a copy of the 3 Big Questions That Change Every Teenager. And so for you listeners, you can enter to win by clicking the link in this episode's copy. So thank you again for listening, and know that we love you. We're praying for you, and we are here for you as you are coming and going.